The radio crackled to life at Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, Pearl Harbor. A pencil scraped against paper in the humid communications room. Japanese naval characters slowly transformed into English words under the steady hand of a cryptographer. The intercepted transmission had originated from the highest levels of Imperial Japanese Navy Command. Commander-in-Chief, Combined Fleet Inspection Schedule. Admiral Yamamoto. The name alone sent electricity through the room. Every detail was there in black ink. Departure time precisely noted. Aircraft types specified. Route information complete. The Japanese military's obsession with detailed planning had delivered an intelligence windfall of staggering proportions. Technical Sergeant Harold Fudener bent over his translation work. His knees ached from hours at the cramped desk. The Military Intelligence Service had trained him well in Japanese naval terminology. Each character required careful analysis. Each phrase demanded perfect accuracy. The original cipher lay beside his English translation. He checked every line twice. The precision was remarkable even by Japanese standards. Exact departure times down to the minute. Specific aircraft model numbers. Precise escort strength calculations. Commander William Goggins felt his pulse quicken as he reviewed the decoded message. Years of directing FRUPAC operations had taught him to recognize truly significant intelligence. This transmission was different. This was the kind of breakthrough that could alter the entire Pacific campaign. Minutes later, the decoded intelligence reached Commander Edwin Layton. The Pacific Fleet intelligence officer's eyes widened as he absorbed every word. His hands trembled slightly as he held the paper. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto would be vulnerable for exactly one brief window. None of them could have predicted the chain of events about to unfold. This single intercepted message would trigger the most daring fighter mission in aviation history. The Pacific War had already taught American commanders a harsh lesson about Japanese leadership. Individual commanders weren't just tactical assets. They were living symbols of imperial power. Destroy the symbol, and you could shatter morale across entire fleets. Enemy forces would lose more than military guidance. They would lose their spiritual center. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto embodied everything Americans had learned to fear about Japanese naval power. Harvard-educated during his younger years, widely traveled throughout the United States, an accomplished poker player who understood American psychology better than any enemy commander. His warnings about American industrial capacity had fallen on deaf ears in Tokyo. His reluctance to wage war against America had been swept aside by political forces. His strategic insights had been ignored by more aggressive voices in the Imperial Navy. Yet, once the decision was made, he had thrown himself completely into the conflict. Pearl Harbor bore his strategic fingerprints from conception to execution. Mathematical precision had guided every aspect of the attack plan. Early Pacific victories had followed his tactical doctrines. Midway had nearly delivered the decisive triumph he had promised. Only American code-breaking abilities had turned the tide at the crucial moment. The irony was not lost on intelligence officers who now held another decoded message in their hands. Henderson Field baked under the tropical sun. Fighter Strip No. 2 stretched across flattened coral that still showed bulldozer tracks. The Lockheed P-38G Lightning sat motionless on the tarmac. Heat waves shimmered from the metal surfaces. Twin Allison V-1710-89-91 engines dominated the aircraft's profile. Each engine could generate 1475 horsepower at war emergency power. Maximum speed reached 414 miles per hour at 25,000 feet altitude. The performance figures represented cutting-edge American aviation technology. Twin booms extended behind the engines like mechanical arms. The horizontal stabilizer connected them across a 52-foot wingspan. The central nacelle housed both pilot and weapons systems. Everything about the design emphasized function over aesthetics. 4 Browning AN-M2 50 caliber machine guns clustered in the nose section. 1 Hispano M2 20mm cannon completed the armament package. The concentration eliminated convergence problems that plagued wing-mounted weapons. Every round fired would strike the same point. 2 external 165-gallon drop tanks supplemented internal fuel capacity. The standard 300 gallons could be extended to 630 gallons total. Combat radius exceeded 450 miles with careful fuel management. No other American fighter in the Pacific Theater could match that operational range. Major John William Mitchell stood inside the operations dugout. Sweat stained his khaki uniform despite the early morning hour. Weather reports covered his makeshift desk, alongside intelligence updates. His mind worked through tactical calculations with mechanical precision. Command of the 339th Fighter Squadron carried enormous responsibility. The 347th Fighter Group had earned its reputation through months of brutal combat. Mitchell's personal logbook showed over 2,000 flight hours. He had flown everything from basic trainers to the most advanced fighters in the American inventory. The tactical problem consumed his thoughts completely. Distance from Guadalcanal to the intercept point measured 435 miles direct. But the direct route would expose them to Japanese observation posts. Radar installations dotted every enemy-held island along that path. The indirect route swung far out to sea before turning north. This path added 165 miles to the outbound leg. Total distance outbound would reach 600 miles. The return journey would cover 400 miles. 1,000 miles total flying distance. Fuel reserves would permit perhaps 7 minutes of combat at war emergency power. The mathematics left no room for error. Standard P-38G internal fuel capacity totaled 300 gallons in main tanks. Reserve tanks held an additional 60 gallons. 2 165-gallon drop tanks would add 330 gallons to the total. Maximum fuel load reached 690 gallons under perfect conditions. Consumption at cruise settings averaged 50 gallons per hour per engine. That consumption rate increased dramatically with altitude and power requirements. Available flying time totaled just over 5 hours and 45 minutes. Required flying time for the mission reached 4 hours and 30 minutes minimum. These calculations assumed perfect navigation and 0 delays. The margin for error was essentially non-existent when combat maneuvering and potential headwinds entered the equation. Captain Thomas George Lanphier, Jr. had studied every aspect of the mission profile. Each detail was burned permanently into his memory. His father, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Lanphier, Sr., had served with distinction in the Great War. The elder Lanphier had worked on General Billy Mitchell's staff during the early development of American air power doctrine. The younger Lanphier possessed tactical skills inherited from his military family. Political instincts had already begun shaping his vision of post-war success. 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, he carried himself with natural leadership bearing. 5 confirmed aerial victories validated his combat credentials, though some remained disputed by squadron mates. His aggressive flying style generated both admiration and criticism. Self-promotion came naturally to him in ways that irritated more modest pilots. At 27 years old, Lanphier viewed the Yamamoto mission as his pathway to fame and future political opportunities. First Lieutenant Rex Theodore Barber represented a completely different type of American fighter pilot. Oregon farm country had shaped his practical worldview. Culver, Oregon remained his spiritual home despite years of military service. Oregon State College engineering studies had taught him analytical thinking. Before September 1940, enlistment changed his life direction. Barber approached aerial combat with mechanical precision and quiet competence. Where Lanfear sought headlines, Barber pursued efficiency above all else. His confirmed aerial victories had been achieved through careful positioning and accurate gunnery, rather than spectacular aerobatic displays. At 25 years old, he possessed an unusual ability to visualize three-dimensional combat geometry. Complex aerial maneuvers could be calculated in his head within seconds. His engineering background influenced every tactical decision. Every action was calculated. Every risk was carefully assessed. Every shot was deliberately aimed. Aboard Mitsubishi G4M1 Type 1 Bomber Number 323, Admiral Yamamoto reviewed inspection schedules with his staff. Lakunai Airfield Rabaul bustled with pre-dawn activity. The Betty bomber represented both Japanese engineering brilliance and necessary compromise. Exceptional range of 2,850 miles had been achieved through radical weight reduction. Minimal armor protection saved weight at the cost of crew safety. Fuel tanks lacked self-sealing capability to reduce complexity and mass. Maximum speed reached 265 miles per hour at 19,685 feet altitude. Cruise speed held steady at 200 miles per hour. The aircraft's vulnerability had earned it grim nicknames among Japanese aircrews. Hamaki meant cigar in Japanese slang. Type 1, lighter, referred to its tendency to burst into flames when hit by enemy fire. But for this particular mission, 6 A6M3 Model 32, Zero fighters from the 204th Air Group would provide escort protection. Admiral Yamamoto, at 59 years old, remained Japan's most formidable strategic thinker. Born Isoroku Takano, he had later been adopted into the prestigious Yamamoto family. 5 feet 3 inches tall, he carried himself with dignity expected of samurai descendants. His left hand bore permanent evidence of combat service. The Battle of Tsushima Strait on May 27, 1905, had cost him 2 fingers. Russian shrapnel had exploded a gun turret aboard the armored cruiser Nishin. The index and middle fingers were lost instantly in the blast. The injury had never diminished his passion for traditional calligraphy. His skill at poker remained legendary among naval officers. His ability to command respect through sheer force of personality was undiminished by physical disability. Harvard University had shaped his understanding of American capabilities. From 1919 to 1921, he had observed American industrial power firsthand. Hitchhiking across the continent had shown him automobile factories in Detroit. Oil refineries in Texas had demonstrated energy production capacity. Aircraft manufacturing plants in California had revealed technological sophistication. The experience had convinced him that prolonged war with America was ultimately unwinnable. His famous prediction about running wild for 6 months before inevitable defeat reflected genuine strategic analysis rather than false modesty. The American plan depended entirely on maintaining absolute secrecy about signals intelligence capabilities. Japanese naval commands must never suspect their codes had been compromised. Any hint of American code breaking would result in immediate cancellation of Yamamoto's flight or complete alteration of the schedule. Station Hypo had been redesignated Fleet Radio Unit Pacific. The cryptanalysis team had been breaking JN-25 variants since before the Battle of Midway. Their ability to read Japanese naval traffic had evolved from partial decrypts to nearly complete message recovery. But each decoded message risked exposing American intelligence capabilities. The decision to act on the Yamamoto intercept required approval at the highest levels. Admiral Chester Nimitz commanded the Pacific Fleet. Admiral William Bull Halsey commanded the South Pacific area. Rear Admiral Mark Mitcher commanded Air Solomons. Ultimately, President Franklin Roosevelt himself had provided final authorization. His alleged order was simple and direct: get Yamamoto. The intercept planning required coordination between multiple officers working around the clock. Marine Major John Condon served as operations officer for Commander Aircraft Solomons. His initial flight plan calculated fuel consumption and navigation waypoints with mathematical precision. Mitchell reviewed and rejected Condon's plan after finding the airspeeds and timing estimates unsuitable for P-38 capabilities. Mitchell recalculated everything from the beginning. Working through the night with his pilots, he developed a completely new plan. This plan maximized their chances of success while minimizing detection risks. The final route consisted of 5 precisely calculated legs. Each segment was designed to avoid Japanese radar coverage. Wind drift and magnetic deviation were factored into every heading calculation. Intelligence analysis revealed several factors that favored the mission's success. The date April 18th marked exactly 1 year since the Doolittle raid on Tokyo. Symbolic significance might provide additional motivation for American aircrews. Weather forecasts indicated favorable conditions with scattered clouds and good visibility. Most critically, Japanese radio traffic showed normal operational patterns. No indication of increased security measures appeared in intercepted communications. The element of surprise, if achieved, would be total and devastating. The Zero escort presented the most formidable tactical challenge. Mission planners devoted hours to analyzing this threat. The Mitsubishi A6M3 Model 32 possessed superior maneuverability compared to the P-38 at medium and low altitudes. Maximum speed reached 336 miles per hour at 19,685 feet altitude. Climb rate peaked at 3,100 feet per minute under ideal conditions. Turning radius measured less than 1,000 feet in tight combat maneuvers. No American fighter could match these performance characteristics in a turning dogfight. But the Zero achieved these capabilities through extreme weight reduction. Empty weight totaled only 3,980 pounds compared to the P-38's 21,780 pounds. Armor protection for the pilot consisted of a single 55mm thick bulletproof glass panel behind the headrest. Fuel tanks lacked self-sealing capabilities, making the aircraft vulnerable to incendiary ammunition. Structural strength had been calculated to absolute minimum requirements. Weight savings took priority over survivability in every design decision. In a turning dogfight below 2,000 feet, the Zero would destroy any P-38 foolish enough to engage on those terms. But in a high-speed diving attack, the Lightning held decisive advantages. Superior firepower could deliver devastating damage in a single burst. Structural strength allowed aggressive maneuvering at speeds that would tear a Zero apart. Lieutenant Besby Frank Holmes had analyzed Zero combat tactics throughout his Solomon Islands tour. Japanese pilots typically maintained close escort formation. Standard positioning placed them 1,500 feet above and slightly behind the bombers. 2 3-plane Shotai formations provided overlapping coverage. Japanese doctrine called for escorts to immediately engage any attacking fighters. The bombers would continue toward their destination, relying on speed and defensive armament for protection. American intelligence had noticed predictable patterns in Japanese formation reactions. When caught by surprise, Japanese formations often reacted slowly to attacks from unexpected angles. Attacks from below and behind seemed to create the most confusion among escort pilots. The key to success lay in achieving complete tactical surprise. This meant approaching across 600 miles of open ocean in broad daylight without detection. The challenge seemed almost impossible until careful analysis revealed potential solutions. April 17, 1943. The mission briefing began at 200 hours in the packed operations tent. Rear Admiral Mark Mitcher, Commander Air Solomons, personally addressed the assembled pilots. His advocacy for naval aviation was legendary throughout the Pacific Fleet. His command of USS Hornet during the Doolittle raid exactly 1 year earlier gave him unique credibility. Mitchell understood the historical significance of this mission better than anyone else present. 18 P-38s would participate in the operation. Careful planning had divided responsibilities among specialized flights. 4 aircraft designated as the killer flight would attack the bombers directly. 12 aircraft would provide top cover against anticipated response from Kahili Airfield's estimated 75 Zero fighters. 2 additional aircraft would serve as spares in case of mechanical failures during the critical mission phases. The pilots selected for the killer flight represented the squadron's most experienced combat veterans. Captain Lanphier brought aggressive leadership and 5 confirmed victories. Lieutenant Barber provided steady reliability and precise gunnery skills. Lieutenant Holmes contributed extensive Zero combat experience. Lieutenant Raymond K. Hine added additional firepower and tactical flexibility. The spare pilots, Lieutenant James McClanahan and Lieutenant Joe Moore, stood ready to replace any killer flight member whose aircraft developed problems. Mitchell's navigation plan reflected both brilliance and desperate necessity. His extensive overwater navigation experience had been gained through years of carrier operations. Leg 1 required magnetic heading, 265 degrees, for 55 minutes at 30 to 50 feet altitude. This segment would cover 183 miles while avoiding Japanese radar detection. Leg 2 demanded heading 290 degrees for 27 minutes, covering 89 miles. Leg 3 specified heading 305 degrees for 38 minutes, covering 125 miles. Leg 4 called for heading 330 degrees for 16 minutes, covering 52 miles. Leg 5 required heading 290 degrees for 21 minutes, covering 70 miles, while climbing to attack altitude. Each leg had been calculated to avoid Japanese observation posts on New Georgia, Vella Lavella, and the Treasury Islands. Wind drift compensation and magnetic deviation corrections were built into every heading. No margin existed for navigation errors of any kind. A deviation of just 1 degree sustained over the total distance would put them miles off course. Insufficient fuel reserves would prevent any search for the target if the initial intercept failed. Pilot survival equipment reflected the mission's desperate nature and slim survival chances. Mae West life preservers would provide flotation in case of water landing. Survival chances in shark-infested waters remained minimal even with flotation devices. Jungle survival kits contained water purification tablets for extended ground operations. Emergency rations would sustain life for several days if rationed carefully. Fishing line and hooks might provide additional food sources. Basic medical supplies could treat minor injuries and infections. Each pilot carried a Colt Model 1911A1 .45 caliber pistol with extra magazines. Everyone understood that capture meant certain execution. Japanese treatment of downed American aviators had become increasingly brutal as the war progressed. Intelligence reports from rescued prisoners described systematic beheadings performed with ceremonial swords. Medical experiments conducted without anesthesia had been confirmed by multiple sources. Reports of cannibalism among isolated Japanese garrisons were becoming more frequent and more credible. The pilots understood their stark choices with crystal clarity. Running out of fuel over water meant almost certain death from exposure or shark attack. Mechanical failure over Japanese territory meant capture and something far worse than death. Lieutenant Colonel Luther S. Moore reviewed meteorological data one final time before the briefing concluded. The weather officer bore responsibility for conditions that could doom the entire mission. Surface winds were forecast from the southeast at 8 knots velocity. Winds at 5,000 feet would blow from the south at 15 knots. Winds at 10,000 feet were predicted from the southwest at 22 knots. Tropical weather patterns in the Solomon Islands were notoriously unpredictable even under the best conditions. Storm systems could develop anywhere along the route with little warning. Even unexpected headwinds might leave the P-38s without sufficient fuel reserves to return safely. The meteorologist estimated a 70% probability of favorable weather conditions. But everyone in the room understood that Solomon Islands weather could change dramatically within minutes. Towering cumulonimbus clouds could develop from clear skies in less than an hour. Tropical squalls could reduce visibility to zero without warning. Radio silence would remain absolute until actual contact with enemy aircraft. The P-38's SCR-274N radio sets had been specially tuned to frequency 6772 kilocycles. This frequency was considered unlikely to be monitored by Japanese listening posts, but any transmission before combat contact risked alerting enemy forces to American presence. Mitchell would navigate for the entire formation using dead reckoning techniques. Compass readings, airspeed indicator clock, and mental calculations would guide 18 aircraft across 600 miles of trackless ocean. No radio beacons would be available to confirm position. No landmarks existed over the endless Pacific swells, except occasional islands that had to be avoided at all costs. One man's navigation skills would determine whether 18 aircraft found their target or disappeared forever into the vast Pacific. Lieutenant Julius Jack Jacobson performed final weapons checks on his assigned aircraft. The 4 Browning AN-M2 50 caliber machine guns each carried 500 rounds of mixed ammunition. M2 ball, M1 incendiary, and M2 armor-piercing rounds were loaded in linked belts according to prescribed ratios. Rate of fire ranged from 750 to 850 rounds per minute per gun, depending on temperature and altitude conditions. The 20mm Hispano M2 cannon carried 150 rounds of high-explosive and armor-piercing shells in its ammunition drum. The concentrated firepower in the P-38's nose created a devastating convergence zone. Every round fired would strike within a few inches of the others. A bomber's wing spar could be sawed through in seconds under this concentrated assault. But maximum rate ammunition consumption meant less than 37 seconds of firing time for the machine guns. The cannon would be exhausted in less than 12 seconds of continuous fire. Every burst would have to count. There would be no second chances for poorly aimed shots. Pre-dawn darkness of April 18th found ground crews performing final preparations under intense time pressure. Master Sergeant Leo B. Godfrey supervised the arming crews with meticulous attention to detail. Every round had to be properly seated in its belt. Every belt had to be correctly aligned in its feed mechanism. Fuel tanks were topped off to absolute capacity with 100-octane aviation gasoline. Internal tanks were filled to exactly 360 gallons. Drop tanks were verified at 165 gallons each. Ammunition belts contained the prescribed mixture of ball armor-piercing and incendiary rounds in a 4:1:1 ratio. Drop tank attachments were checked and double-checked by experienced mechanics. A mechanical failure in a single shackle could abort an aircraft's participation. Worse, a tank that failed to release could create fatal drag during combat maneuvering. Oil levels were verified according to technical manual specifications. Hydraulic pressures were checked against acceptable parameters. Control surfaces were inspected for full range of motion. Engine run-ups confirmed proper magneto operation and carburetor settings. The Japanese Navy's 11th Air Fleet at Rabaul operated under strict protocols for high-ranking officer transport. Vice Admiral Jinichi Kusaka, commander of the Southeast Area Fleet, served as Yamamoto's immediate subordinate. He had argued strenuously against the inspection tour. American fighter activity had increased dramatically around Bougainville following the Japanese evacuation of Guadalcanal in February. Intelligence reports suggested the Americans had nearly 200 fighters operating from Guadalcanal, the Russell Islands, and other forward bases. Recent combat losses had been severe among experienced Japanese pilots. Replacement aircrew lacked the combat experience of their predecessors. Fuel shortages were beginning to affect training programs throughout the theater. But Yamamoto insisted on personally inspecting forward positions and congratulating aircrews. Operation I-Go had recently concluded with claimed victories against American shipping. Reports claimed 1 cruiser, 2 destroyers, and 25 transports sunk in recent raids. Actual American losses totaled 1 destroyer, 1 corvette, 1 tanker, and 2 cargo ships. The discrepancy between claimed and actual results was typical of inflated combat reports throughout the Pacific War. Chief Petty Officer Hiroshi Hayashi supervised preparation of Yamamoto's aircraft at Lakunai Airfield. Betty Bomber, tail number 323, from the 705th Air Group, had been selected for its excellent maintenance record. The aircraft had completed 47 combat missions without significant mechanical failure. Additional fuel tanks had been installed in the bomb bay to ensure adequate reserves for the round trip. The Admiral's seat had been positioned on the left side behind the pilot. This location provided the best view for aerial observation during the inspection flight. A special mounting had been installed for Yamamoto's personal katana sword. The family heirloom dated to the 16th century Momoyama period. The blade had been forged by a master swordsmith whose name was lost to history. The escort fighters came from the 204th Air Group, an elite unit with extensive combat experience over the Solomons. The 6 pilots selected for the mission averaged over 500 combat hours each. Their combined experience totaled more than 3,000 hours of aerial combat. Among them was Petty Officer First Class Shoichi Sugita, who would later become one of Japan's leading aces. His eventual victory total would exceed 70 confirmed kills before his death in April 1945. Also flying escort was Petty Officer First Class Kenji Yanagiya, a 100-mission veteran. Yanagiya felt deeply honored to protect the combined fleet commander during this inspection flight. These pilots had faced American P-38s, P-39s, P-40s, and F-4F Wildcats in numerous engagements throughout the Solomon Islands campaign. The Lightning's speed advantage was known to diminish below 15,000 feet due to compressibility effects. The Zero's superior power-to-weight ratio provided better performance at low altitudes. Its turning radius at low altitude exceeded the P-38's by a factor of 2. In a low-altitude turning engagement, the Zero pilots believed they would hold every advantage except firepower and armor protection. Their confidence was based on months of successful combat against various American fighter types. At 07:25 hours local time, 05225 Tokyo time on April 18th, Mitchell's P-38s began taking off from Fighter Strip No. 2 at Henderson Field. The takeoff sequence had been carefully orchestrated to minimize time and fuel consumption. Mitchell led the procession, followed by his flight of 3 aircraft. Then came Lanfear's killer flight in precise formation. The cover flights followed in predetermined order. Every pilot had memorized his position in the sequence. Lieutenant McClanahan's aircraft suffered a blown tire during the takeoff roll. The P-38 skidded off the runway in a cloud of coral dust and debris. The right main gear collapsed completely, tearing away wheel and strut assemblies. McClanahan was uninjured, but eliminated from the mission immediately. His aircraft would require days of repair work before returning to service. The killer flight was reduced to 3 aircraft. Lieutenant Joe Moore's aircraft developed fuel transfer pump failure during initial climb-out. The malfunction prevented him from accessing fuel in his drop tanks. Without drop tank fuel, His range was insufficient for the mission. Moore was forced to return to Henderson Field immediately. 16 P-38s continued the mission, two fewer than originally planned. The margin for error, already razor-thin, had diminished even further. Mitchell led the formation at exactly 30 to 50 feet above the water surface. This altitude would keep them below Japanese radar detection capabilities. Salt spray coated windscreens within minutes of departing land. Frequent clearing was necessary to maintain forward visibility. The pilots flew in complete radio silence, maintaining position through visual reference alone. Each pilot fought his own individual battle against monotony and mounting fatigue. 2 hours and 5 minutes of formation flying at extreme low altitude demanded constant attention. Throttle adjustments were required continuously to maintain position. Engine instruments needed frequent monitoring while avoiding spatial disorientation over endless water. The Pacific swells rolled beneath them in hypnotic succession. The regularity was almost mesmerizing to pilots already fighting fatigue. Several pilots later reported struggling with drowsiness, using various techniques to maintain alertness. Some resorted to slapping their own faces when alertness flagged. Others sang loudly inside their oxygen masks to stay awake. The sun blazed through plexiglass canopies, turning cockpits into ovens despite the cooling slipstream. Lieutenant Roger J. Ames, flying in the cover flight, monitored his fuel consumption with growing concern. Drag from his drop tanks exceeded calculated expectations, possibly due to improper attachment angle or manufacturing variations. At current consumption rates, he would have perhaps 5 minutes of reserve fuel upon return to base. The mathematics were simple and absolutely terrifying. Burn too much fuel outbound, and they wouldn't make it home. Conserve too much, and they might lack power for combat maneuvering. Each pilot made continuous micro-adjustments to propeller pitch and throttle settings. Mission requirements had to be balanced against survival probability. The Allison engines droned steadily, their synchronized sound becoming almost hypnotic over the long hours. At 0600 hours, Tokyo time, A0800 local Yamamoto's two-bomber formation departed Rabaul exactly on schedule. The Admiral wore his dress white uniform with full decorations. The Order of the Chrysanthemum and Order of the Golden Kite gleamed on his chest. His intention was to impress forward area troops with Imperial Navy prestige and tradition. His mood was reportedly somber, despite the ceremonial nature of the flight. Several staff officers later testified that he seemed to have dark premonitions about this particular mission. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, Yamamoto's chief of staff and close personal friend, occupied Betty Bomber number 326. Several additional staff officers accompanied him in the second aircraft. The formation climbed steadily to 6,500 feet cruise altitude. The escort fighters took position in 2 3-plane flights, according to standard doctrine. Visibility was excellent with scattered cumulus clouds at 4,000 to 5,000 feet, providing occasional concealment opportunities. Warrant Officer Kenji Yanagiya, flying escort in Zero Tail number 3981, scanned the sky in prescribed patterns. 3 years of continuous combat had developed his visual search instincts to near supernatural levels. He could identify aircraft types at distances where other pilots saw only specks against the sky. His peripheral vision could detect the slightest movement against cloud backgrounds. Years of training had honed these skills to razor sharpness. Yet on this morning, his attention focused primarily on maintaining precise formation position relative to the bombers. The flight from Rabaul to Balale had been completed dozens of times without significant incident. American fighters had never penetrated this far north in substantial strength. The greatest danger seemed to be operational accidents rather than enemy action. Mechanical failures posed more immediate threats than American interception. At 0934 hours, local time, Mitchell's formation reached the final navigation turn point precisely on schedule. They had been airborne for 2 hours and 9 minutes, flying entirely by dead reckoning over trackless ocean. Mitchell checked his specially synchronized Elgin watch against his calculated position. If his navigation was correct, they should turn northwest now for the final intercept approach. If he had made any error in wind calculation or compass heading, they would miss the target entirely. He waggled his wings, signaling the planned turn to northwest heading. 16 P-38s banked in perfect unison toward Bougainville. The timing was extraordinary even by the standards of experienced navigation. They were exactly 1 minute ahead of the planned intercept time, having covered 410 miles of open ocean navigation. Only compass clock and airspeed indicator had guided them across the vast Pacific. Lieutenant Douglas S. Canning, flying as Mitchell's wingman in the number 2 position, was the first pilot to spot the target formation. "Bogies, 11 o'clock high," he called at Aero 934, breaking radio silence for the first time in over 2 hours. The range was approximately 5 miles, with an altitude differential of 6,000 feet. 8 aircraft flew in perfect formation, exactly where intelligence had predicted they would be. Mitchell felt a surge of pure adrenaline mixed with professional amazement. They had found the proverbial needle in the Pacific haystack. 2 Betty bombers in precise echelon formation, and 6 Zero fighters in 2 flights of 3. The enemy formation showed no awareness of 16 P-38s climbing toward them from below and behind. Mitchell immediately ordered drop tanks jettisoned to reduce drag for combat maneuvering. "Skin those tanks, all flights, let's get them," he transmitted over the radio. 16 165-gallon tanks tumbled toward the ocean as the P-38s shed their drag-inducing burden. Engines were pushed to war emergency power settings, delivering 1475 horsepower per engine. The Lightnings accelerated rapidly through 300 miles per hour while climbing at maximum sustainable rate of 2,800 feet per minute. The killer flight would execute the primary attack, while Mitchell led the cover flight higher to intercept any reinforcing fighters from Kahili Airfield. Captain Lanfear saw the escort Zeros begin to react to the approaching threat. They had spotted the climbing P-38s and were dropping their own belly tanks in preparation for combat. Standard Zero doctrine called for protecting the bombers by intercepting attacking fighters before they could reach the primary targets. Lanfear made an instant tactical decision that would later generate decades of heated controversy among aviation historians and participants. Instead of continuing toward the bombers with Barber, he turned to engage the diving Zeros head-on. His reasoning, as he would later claim, was to eliminate the escort threat and allow Barber a clear, unobstructed attack run against the bombers. His critics would argue that he was glory-hunting, seeking easier fighter-versus-fighter kills over the primary mission target. Lieutenant Barber maintained his attack course toward the bombers, which were now diving desperately toward the jungle canopy below. The lead Betty had nosed over into a steep dive with its pilot, attempting to reach treetop level. At low altitude, the P-38's speed advantage would be minimized, and the jungle would provide cover from further attacks. Barber pushed his Lightning into a 45-degree dive, with his airspeed indicator climbing rapidly past 400 miles per hour. The distance closed with frightening speed, as physics and geometry converged toward the moment of contact that would change the course of the Pacific War forever. The distance closed rapidly. 2,000 yards became 1,500, then 1,000. At 500 yards, Barber unleashed everything his Lightning possessed. 4 streams of 50-caliber machine gun fire merged with 20-millimeter cannon shells. The deadly convergence focused on the bomber's right engine and wing root. What happened next defied description. The Betty's right engine vanished in a brilliant orange fireball. Flames erupted across the wing surface. Concentrated gunfire severed the wing structure completely. The massive bomber rolled violently to port. Control was gone forever. Barber yanked his controls hard back. His P-38 screamed under tremendous G-forces. The metal frame groaned in protest. Through his canopy, he glimpsed the Betty tumbling earthward. Fire and debris streamed behind the doomed aircraft. The jungle canopy swallowed it whole. A towering column of black smoke marked where it struck Earth. One bomber destroyed. But which aircraft carried the Admiral? Barber had no way of knowing as his eyes swept the sky. The second bomber remained somewhere nearby. Holmes and Hine had initially followed Barber's lead. The violent maneuvering had scattered them across miles of airspace. Holmes spotted the surviving Betty skimming low over water. The aircraft raced southward along Bougainville's rugged coastline. Maximum speed stretched every rivet. Vice Admiral Ugaki's pilot had chosen ocean over jungle. He dove for the wave tops, hoping water would prevent attacks from below. Holmes rolled into position, but his approach was too fast. His burst damaged the Betty's right engine badly. White vapor streamed from ruptured fuel lines. Oil misted across the cowling. But Holmes overshot before inflicting fatal damage. The Betty continued its desperate escape attempt. Barber acquired the second bomber after Holmes missed his chance. The aircraft barely cleared 50 feet above churning waves. Its damaged engine trailed thick smoke. The pilot fought to maintain altitude while nursing his wounded machine toward safety. Barber calculated deflection carefully, leading the target by 30 degrees, accounting for its speed and his closure rate. His first burst walked across ocean surface. Geysers of spray erupted skyward. Then his fire climbed into the bomber's belly. Large sections of aluminum skin peeled away instantly. Some fragments struck Barber's lightning with audible impacts. Metal rang against metal. His canopy remained intact. The Betty's left engine caught fire immediately. The Japanese pilot attempted emergency water landing, but approach speed exceeded 100 miles per hour. The bomber hit ocean surface like concrete. The fuselage separated from wings on impact. Debris scattered across a wide area. No survivors emerged from the wreckage. Meanwhile, Lanphier engaged escort Zeros in vicious combat. Vertical scissors maneuvers tested both aircraft and pilot. His P-38's superior speed maintained energy advantage. The lighter Zeros relied on turning ability alone. Lanphier claimed 1 Zero destroyed during this engagement. He described rolling, inverted, and firing into wing roots. The enemy fighter allegedly exploded. However, Japanese records tell different stories. No escort fighters were lost that day. The remaining Zeros focused on survival over victory. Warrant Officer Yanagiya led his surviving pilots away from combat. Their primary mission, protecting the bombers, had failed catastrophically. Further fighting served no purpose. The top cover flight maintained watch overhead. Mitchell led them at 18,000 feet. They scanned constantly for fighters from Kahili Airfield. The base sat just 20 miles away. Intelligence predicted 75 Zeros would scramble immediately. That swarm never materialized. Either surprise was complete, or Japanese fighters were committed elsewhere. Mitchell held altitude advantage, ready to dive on climbing interceptors. Below him, the killer flight completed their deadly work. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 minutes. Time over target measured perhaps 3 minutes of actual combat. Mission success depended entirely on target identification. Which bomber had carried Yamamoto? Only post-mission intelligence would reveal the answer. Lieutenant Barber's Lightning bore extensive battle damage. Ground crews would later count 104 bullet holes. Return fire from defensive machine guns had peppered his aircraft. 7.7mm bullets had found their mark repeatedly. Some damage possibly came from Zero fighters during the melee. Hydraulic fluid leaked from punctured lines throughout his fuselage. Reddish streaks marked the damage clearly. One engine ran roughly from possible debris ingestion. Battle damage might have affected internal components, but both Allison engines continued functioning properly. The Lightning remained controllable despite severe punishment. Barber faced the long journey home, constantly monitoring engine parameters. Temperature gauges demanded frequent attention. Fuel consumption calculations became critical. Every unusual vibration might signal impending engine failure. 400 miles of hostile ocean stretched ahead. The return flight would test every pilot's endurance and skill beyond normal limits. Fuel reserves reached critically low levels for several aircraft. Lieutenant Holmes experienced engine problems, forcing power reduction. He fell steadily behind the formation as miles accumulated. Radio discipline prevented coordination or calls for assistance. Each pilot flew alone with his calculations. Would remaining fuel carry him safely home? The mathematics of survival played out in 16 cockpits simultaneously. As they approached Russell Islands, approximately 200 miles from base, several pilots faced critical decisions. Holmes' fuel gauges showed dangerously low readings. Rather than risk ocean ditching, he considered emergency landing at Banaka Island, but Japanese submarines operated in those waters frequently. Rescue remained uncertain at best. He chose to continue toward Guadalcanal, trusting his calculations and reliable Allison engines. Mitchell's navigation on the return leg proved equally precise as the outbound journey. Scattered P-38s gradually reformed as familiar landmarks appeared ahead. At 12:30 hours local time, Fighter Strip 2 appeared exactly where expected. Navigation had been perfect throughout the mission. Several aircraft operated on vapors by landing time. Holmes touched down with both engines sputtering badly. His fuel tanks registered essentially empty. Others landed with less than 10 gallons remaining. Perhaps 3 minutes of flight time separated success from disaster. The margin between triumph and catastrophe was measured in gallons of aviation gasoline. As pilots shut down their engines, ground crews swarmed immediately. Bullet holes were counted methodically. Battle damage was assessed carefully. The immediate question consumed everyone's thoughts. Had they succeeded? Which bomber carried the Admiral? Pilots could only report 2 bombers destroyed completely. Target identification had proven impossible during fierce combat. Intelligence officers would wait for Japanese reaction to determine mission outcome. The waiting would prove agonizing for all participants. That evening, tropical darkness fell over Guadalcanal like a curtain. Pilots gathered in the officers' club afterward. The ramshackle structure combined salvaged lumber with captured Japanese materials. Atmosphere remained tense despite apparent success. Captain Lanfear, ever conscious of publicity value, immediately promoted his version of events. He claimed shooting down Yamamoto's bomber after spectacular vertical reversal maneuver, rolling inverted and firing from above into the bomber. His account required being in 2 places simultaneously. Engaging Zeros while attacking bombers defied physical laws. Lieutenant Barber quietly disputed this elaborate narrative. He described his straightforward stern attack on the lead bomber. Facts mattered more than theatrical descriptions. Time would vindicate his modest account over Lanfear's dramatic claims. Japanese search parties found Admiral Yamamoto's crashed bomber the following day. April 19th brought grim discovery in dense Bougainville jungle. Wreckage scattered through vegetation approximately 4 miles inland from Moila Point. The crash site lay near Aku village in territory controlled by Japanese ground forces. Lieutenant Commander Tabuchi Shigeru of the 26th Air Flotilla led the search effort. Yamamoto's body was discovered thrown clear of main wreckage. He remained strapped in his aircraft seat. Death had maintained dignity even in destruction. His white-gloved hand still clutched his ceremonial sword tightly. Military bearing persisted beyond life itself. Medical examination by Dr. Tanaka revealed 2 gunshot wounds clearly. Ballistics told the story of his final moments. 1 bullet entered below his left shoulder blade. It exited above his right eye after passing through vital organs. Another bullet struck his jaw directly. Death occurred instantaneously during Barber's initial firing pass. The Admiral never knew what killed him. The psychological impact on Japanese Navy exceeded all calculations. Yamamoto represented more than fleet commander. He embodied naval tradition and strategic thinking combined. His understanding of combined fleet operations remained unmatched throughout the service. His ability inspiring loyalty among subordinates had achieved legendary status. His realistic assessment of American capabilities provided the only check on Japanese strategic overreach. No replacement possessed his unique combination of vision and influence. Captain Yasuji Watanabe survived the second bomber's crash with severe injuries. He later described Yamamoto's death as creating a void that could never be filled adequately. Watanabe had played shogi with the Admiral just the previous night. Yamamoto had seemed unusually fatalistic during their conversation. Japanese naval intelligence immediately suspected Americans had broken their communications codes. The precision of the intercept, arriving at exactly the right place and time after 600-mile flight, seemed impossible through mere coincidence. Timing exactly 1 year after Doolittle raid suggested deliberate planning and preparation. But acknowledging code compromise required admitting catastrophic intelligence failure. Such admission could affect all ongoing operations throughout the Pacific. Security concerns outweighed accurate historical record-keeping. Instead, Japanese authorities claimed Yamamoto died while directing forward operations personally. They maintained fiction that his death occurred during routine combat rather than targeted assassination. Truth would remain classified for decades afterward. The American reaction was initially subdued due to operational security concerns. If Japanese confirmed that codes were compromised, the intelligence advantage would disappear immediately. That advantage had proved decisive at Midway. It had enabled the Yamamoto mission itself. President Roosevelt received news with grim satisfaction, but ordered absolute secrecy maintained. Admiral Nimitz worried that publicity might reveal American code-breaking capabilities completely. For over 1 month, the American public remained unaware Yamamoto was dead. They certainly didn't know American fighters had killed him deliberately. The controversy over who shot down Yamamoto began immediately upon landing at Guadalcanal. It would poison relationships among participants for decades afterward. Captain Lanfear, ever conscious of publicity value, aggressively promoted his claim to fame. His account evolved and became more elaborate over time. He described performing extreme vertical reversal maneuvers, rolling inverted and firing into bomber wing roots from above. This version required violating basic laws of physics, being in 2 places simultaneously while performing maneuvers exceeding P-38 capabilities. Lieutenant Barber's account remained more modest and consistent with physical evidence throughout. He described straightforward stern chase and attack on the lead bomber, followed by separate attack on the second bomber afterward. His version matched witness testimony and crash site evidence perfectly. Japanese witnesses, including Zero pilot Yanagiya, interviewed after war's end, confirmed seeing only one P-38 attack, the lead bomber. The American fighter approached from behind and below exactly as Barber described consistently. No vertical reversals or inverted firing occurred during the engagement. The angle of bullet impacts on Yamamoto's body, entering from below and behind, matched Barber's attack geometry perfectly. The distribution of bullet holes in wreckage was consistent with fire from behind and below, not from above, as Lanphier claimed repeatedly. The dispute continued for decades, poisoning relationships among mission participants permanently. In October 1943, Time magazine featured an article about the mission. It mentioned Lanphier by name, nearly compromising operational security entirely. Navy leadership was furious about premature publicity. The Air Force officially credited both Lanphier and Barber with half a kill each in 1991. This political compromise satisfied absolutely no one involved. Historical evidence supported Barber's account exclusively. In 2003, after extensive analysis, historians reached definitive conclusions. Japanese records, crash site evidence, and witness testimony all confirmed Barber alone shot down Yamamoto. The controversy was finally settled by facts rather than politics. Major Mitchell, who led the mission with extraordinary skill, received Navy Cross rather than Medal of Honor originally recommended. The security breach caused by premature publicity had angered Navy leadership deeply. Inter-service politics affected recognition unfairly. Every pilot on the mission received Navy Cross recognition. This acknowledged the operation's exceptional danger and importance clearly. But Mitchell's extraordinary navigation deserved greater recognition than politics allowed. Finding moving target after 600 miles of dead reckoning was masterful. Technical lessons from Operation Vengeance influenced American fighter development throughout the war's remainder. The P-38's unique combination of range firepower and speed had proved decisive completely. No other American fighter could have executed this specific mission successfully. The Lightning's twin-engine reliability brought damaged aircraft home safely. Single-engine fighters would have been lost over hostile ocean. Concentrated nose armament achieved instant devastating effects. Wing-mounted guns could never match such destructive power. These lessons influenced development of long-range escort fighters like P-51D Mustang afterward. Range became critical consideration for all future fighter designs. Firepower concentration received equal emphasis in subsequent aircraft development. Japanese naval aviation never recovered from Yamamoto's loss completely. His successor, Admiral Mineichi Koga, lacked Yamamoto's strategic vision and charismatic leadership abilities. Koga would die in plane crash less than 1 year later, in March 1944. Another devastating blow to Japanese naval leadership structure. Japanese Navy's subsequent operations reflected increasingly desperate tactics rather than coherent strategy development. The decisive battle Yamamoto had sought to orchestrate never materialized under his successors. Single engagement to destroy American carrier forces remained fantasy rather than achievable goal. Instead, Japanese naval aviation died through attrition in Great Marianas, Turkey Shoot. Battle of Leyte Gulf completed the destruction process. Strategic coherence disappeared with Yamamoto's death. The psychological impact extended far beyond military implications alone. Yamamoto had been portrayed in Japanese propaganda as invincible leader, the supreme naval strategist who would lead Japan to inevitable victory over America. His death shattered this carefully constructed mythology completely. If Yamamoto could be hunted down and killed, what did that say about Japan's prospects for victory? Morale throughout Japanese military began decline that accelerated with each subsequent defeat afterward. Victory disease that infected Japanese strategic thinking gave way to desperate fatalism. American code-breaking capabilities continued providing decisive advantages throughout Pacific War's remainder. Japanese never fully acknowledged their codes were compromised entirely. They made only incremental improvements rather than wholesale changes to communication systems. This intelligence blindness cost them dearly at Philippine Sea battle. American fighters decimated Japanese naval aviation in Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Ability to read enemy intentions transformed American defensive operations into carefully orchestrated ambushes repeatedly. The human cost of Yamamoto's death extended to those who flew the mission afterward. Lieutenant Raymond Hine was later lost in action. He never returned from subsequent mission over hostile territory. The war claimed many who participated in Operation Vengeance. Captain Lanfear left military after war's end to pursue politics and business opportunities. He traded on his claimed role in killing Yamamoto despite disputed nature of his account. Self-promotion became his primary occupation. Lieutenant Barber remained in Air Force, retiring as colonel in 1961. His modesty prevented fully challenging Lanfear's narrative until late in life. Historical evidence eventually vindicated his truthful account completely. The mission's success relied on extraordinary coordination between intelligence services, naval command, and Army aviation units. Navy had decoded the message through work of cryptanalysts like Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton. Marine Major John Condon provided initial mission planning expertise. Army Air Force pilots executed the intercept with precision and skill. This inter-service cooperation, often lacking in other Pacific operations, proved unified command could achieve remarkable results when properly coordinated. The lessons influenced American military doctrine through World War II's remainder and into modern era. Joint operations became standard practice rather than exceptional circumstance. Admiral Yamamoto's death represented more than loss of one commander, however skilled. His unique understanding of American capabilities had provided Japan's only realistic strategic vision throughout the conflict. He alone among Japanese leaders truly comprehended American industrial capacity and political will to fight. His famous quote about running wild for 6 months, maybe 1 year, reflected understanding that Japan could not win prolonged war against America. His replacement by commanders who believed in spiritual superiority over material reality accelerated Japan's inevitable defeat. The timing of Yamamoto's death, April 18, 1943, held special significance beyond military considerations. Exactly 1 year after Doolittle raid on Tokyo, American fighters had struck at heart of Japanese military leadership directly. The symbolism was intentional and powerfully effective. America could reach across vast distances to strike specific targets with surgical precision capabilities. No Japanese commander remained safe from American reach. The hunters had become the hunted throughout Pacific theater. The psychological impact rippled through Japanese military leadership, creating hesitation and uncertainty in strategic planning processes. Decision-making became paralyzed by fear of American intelligence capabilities. Technical analysis of the mission revealed both strengths and limitations of American fighter operations clearly. P-38 range had been pushed to absolute limits of aircraft capability. Several aircraft returned with essentially dry fuel tanks completely. Had Yamamoto's flight been delayed by 30 minutes, American fighters might have exhausted fuel searching for target unsuccessfully. The margin between success and catastrophe was measured in gallons of gasoline and minutes of flight time available. This razor-thin margin highlighted need for even longer range fighters and better fuel management systems in future aircraft designs. Engineering requirements became more demanding based on operational experience gained. The role of weather in mission success cannot be overstated by any measure. Clear visibility at intercept point allowed visual acquisition at maximum range possible. Scattered cloud cover along return route provided concealment from potential Japanese interceptors. A tropical storm anywhere along the route would have forced mission cancellation entirely. Weather gods, as pilots often said, had chosen sides on April 18, 1943. Even slight wind shift could have doomed mission completely. Japanese efforts to conceal Yamamoto's death revealed magnitude of the loss clearly. For over 1 month, Japanese propaganda continued issuing statements in Yamamoto's name posthumously. His death was finally announced on May 21, 1943. It was described as occurring while engaging enemy in front-line combat. A state funeral on June 5 saw hundreds of thousands of mourners line Tokyo streets respectfully. Emperor Hirohito himself attended an unprecedented honor reflecting Yamamoto's unique status in Japanese society. Part of his ashes were interred at Tama Cemetery in Tokyo. The remainder went to his family temple in Nagaoka. The American pilots who flew the mission struggled with conflicting emotions afterward. They had succeeded in killing respected adversary, acknowledged as military genius by many. Yamamoto had opposed war with America, understanding its futility better than those who ordered him to plan Pearl Harbor attack. Yet he had orchestrated Pearl Harbor, making him legitimate target for retribution under laws of war. The moral complexity of targeted assassination, even in wartime, troubled some participants for decades afterward. Conscience and duty conflicted in many minds. Intelligence officer Edwin Layton, who urged mission approval, later reflected on Yamamoto's death with mixed feelings. He had known Yamamoto personally from pre-war diplomatic functions in 1930s. Professional relationship had developed into grudging respect. He understood Yamamoto's strategic vision, while dangerous to America, was grounded in realistic assessment rather than militaristic fantasy common among Japanese leaders. Yet Layton also knew Yamamoto's death would save American lives by disrupting Japanese naval planning completely. War demanded such terrible choices between competing moral imperatives. Victory required eliminating enemy leadership, regardless of personal qualities or relationships involved. The mission demonstrated American technological superiority in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Code breaking provided essential intelligence for target acquisition. Long-range fighters provided delivery weapon system. Precise navigation provided targeting capability. But technology alone had not guaranteed success in any measure. Human factors proved equally critical throughout. Mitchell's navigation skills. Barber's marksmanship under pressure. Maintenance crew's dedication to aircraft reliability. These transformed technical capability into operational success. The synthesis of human skill and mechanical precision would characterize American military superiority throughout Pacific War's remainder. Technology without skilled operators achieved nothing meaningful. Post-war analysis revealed how close mission came to failure at multiple critical points. If Lieutenant Canning had not spotted Japanese formation when he did, P-38s might have overflown target completely. Visual acquisition required precise timing and keen eyesight. If Barber had not maintained pursuit of diving bomber, Yamamoto might have escaped into jungle successfully. Determination and flying skill proved essential during critical moments. If Holmes had not damaged second bomber, allowing Barber to complete destruction, witnesses might have survived to warn of American code-breaking capabilities. Each link in operational chain had held but barely under extreme stress. Success required everything working perfectly simultaneously. Squadron records revealed mission narrow margins in stark detail afterward. Fuel consumption data showed several aircraft operated beyond calculated ranges successfully. They succeeded only through favorable winds and careful engine management throughout flight. Ammunition expenditure reports indicated Barber fired approximately 70% of available rounds during 2 attack runs. Conservation became critical when opportunities were limited. Maintenance logs documented extensive damage to multiple aircraft, testament to intensity of Japanese defensive fire during brief combat moments. The strategic implications of Yamamoto's death extended beyond immediate military effects significantly. His absence removed the one Japanese leader who might have negotiated reasonable peace terms as war turned against Japan increasingly. Yamamoto understood Japan could not win prolonged war against American industrial might completely. His successors, lacking perspective and influence, pursued increasingly desperate strategies. These prolonged war and increased casualties on both sides unnecessarily. The kamikaze tactics that emerged later in war reflected strategic bankruptcy that followed Yamamoto's death directly. Desperate measures replaced coherent planning throughout Japanese military structure. Weather records for April 18, 1943, confirmed exceptional conditions that enabled mission success. Visibility exceeded 10 miles throughout most of route flown. Cloud cover remained scattered rather than solid throughout day. Wind speeds and directions closely matched forecast values provided. Such favorable conditions occurred perhaps one day in 10 during Solomon Islands' typical weather patterns. Mission had launched during brief window of opportunity that might not have occurred again for weeks. The intelligence success enabling Operation Vengeance relied on hundreds of cryptanalysts, translators, and analysts working in absolute secrecy. Station Hypo and other facilities processed thousands of intercepted messages daily. Their contribution to victory often went unrecognized, overshadowed by more visible combat operations. Yet without their patient, meticulous work, the Yamamoto mission would have been impossible to execute. The codebreakers provided the sword, the pilots merely wielded it effectively. Technical examination of crashed Betty bomber revealed devastating effectiveness of concentrated forward-firing armament clearly. P-38's 50-caliber machine guns and 20mm cannon created convergence zone of destruction approximately 30 inches in diameter at typical combat ranges. Within this zone, nothing could survive concentrated firepower. The bomber's aluminum structure was shredded completely. Control cables were severed instantly. Fuel lines ruptured throughout aircraft. Crew members were killed immediately. No amount of armor could have protected against such concentrated destruction. The Zero escort fighters' failure to protect bombers highlighted critical weakness in Japanese tactical doctrine. Escorts reacted according to training, engaging attacking fighters rather than maintaining close protection of bombers. This predictable response allowed Barber to reach bombers while Lanfear occupied Zero's attention. American fighters would exploit this tactical inflexibility repeatedly in subsequent operations throughout Pacific. Japanese training emphasized individual combat over mission accomplishment consistently. Admiral Nimitz' decision to authorize mission required careful calculation of risks versus benefits involved. If mission failed with heavy losses, it might have revealed American code-breaking capabilities while achieving nothing useful. If publicity leaked prematurely, Japanese might have changed their codes entirely. Nimitz accepted these risks because Yamamoto represented unique target, a commander whose abilities could not be replaced by any available successor. History validated his decision completely. The mission planning process revealed American advantages in staff work and operational planning clearly. Multiple alternatives were considered and discarded systematically. Contingency plans were developed for various failure modes possible. Weather patterns were analyzed in extensive detail. Fuel consumption was calculated to individual gallons required. This methodical approach, combining thorough preparation with tactical flexibility, would characterize successful American operations throughout Pacific War remainder. The mission's code name, Operation Vengeance, reflected American emotions regarding Pearl Harbor attack. Yet pilots who flew mission reported little sense of personal vengeance afterward. They had executed military operation with professional detachment required. The broader satisfaction of avenging Pearl Harbor belonged to strategic planners and political leaders. For pilots, survival and mission accomplishment had been satisfaction enough. The mission demonstrated evolution of American fighter tactics from defensive to offensive operations. Early in war, American fighters struggled to protect their own bombers from Japanese interception. By April 1943, American fighters conducted complex offensive operations deep in Japanese-controlled airspace. This transformation reflected improved aircraft, better training, superior tactics, and growing confidence born from accumulated success. American pilots had learned to fight effectively. The legacy of Operation Vengeance extends beyond its immediate military impact significantly. It demonstrated individual leadership could still matter in industrialized warfare. Precise intelligence could enable surgical military strikes. Technological superiority meant nothing without human skills to employ it effectively. These lessons would resonate through subsequent American military operations from Vietnam to War on Terror. Principles remained constant across different conflicts. In final analysis, Operation Vengeance represented American warfare at its most effective level. Superior technology guided by precise intelligence. Careful planning executed with tactical flexibility. Individual excellence within coordinated team effort. The synthesis of these elements had killed Admiral Yamamoto. With him died Japan's best hope for negotiated peace settlement. Pacific War would continue 28 more months, but its outcome was no longer in doubt after April 18th. That day dawned with 18 American pilots preparing for impossible mission. It ended with Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto dead in Bougainville jungle. Japan's naval strategy lay in ruins. American victory in Pacific became increasingly inevitable. The longest fighter intercept mission in history achieved its objective through brilliant planning, superior technology, exceptional flying skills, and extraordinary luck. Operation Vengeance delivered exactly what its name promised. Revenge for Pearl Harbor. Elimination of Japan's most dangerous military mind. The 16 P-38 Lightnings that returned to Guadalcanal that afternoon had changed Pacific War's course forever. Their pilots flew to very edge of mechanical and human endurance. They fought brief but decisive battle. They returned to tell the tale of ultimate success. In those few minutes over Bougainville, they achieved what thousands of bombers and millions of bullets could not accomplish. Precise elimination of irreplaceable enemy leadership. The age of strategic assassination had begun. Warfare would never be quite the same afterward.